You know what's fascinating about this entire Mason Marchment conversation? It's that we're having it at all. Because buried beneath all the passionate rhetoric, all the emotional appeals about correcting past mistakes and bringing back a familiar face, there's a fundamental question that nobody seems willing to ask. If Mason Marchment is truly the transformative piece that elevates the Toronto Maple Leafs from playoff hopeful to legitimate Stanley Cup contender, then why is he currently playing for the Seattle Kraken, a team sitting near the bottom of the Western Conference standings? Why hasn't some other contender already swooped in and made the supposedly obvious move? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is that Mason Marchment is not a difference maker. He's a solid player, a useful player, a player who brings value in specific situations and specific roles. But he is not, and has never been, the kind of asset that transforms a franchise's championship trajectory. And the sooner we accept that reality, the sooner we can have an honest conversation about what the Toronto Maple Leafs actually need versus what makes us feel good emotionally. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't lie and they don't care about nostalgia. Mason Marchment is 29 years old. He's currently on pace for approximately 35 to 40 points over a full 82-game season with Seattle. That's respectable. That's useful. But that's also exactly the kind of production that Matthew Knies is already providing at 22 years old on an entry-level contract. Knies has 11 goals and 23 points through 34 games this season. He's bigger, younger, faster, and more physically dominant than Marchman. He plays the exact same net front, power forward style. So explain to me, with logic and reason rather than emotion, why Toronto should trade assets to acquire an older, more expensive version of a player they already have on a roster who is outproducing him? This is the core problem with the entire Marchment proposal. It's built on a foundation of sentimentality rather than strategic necessity. Yes, Toronto let him go too early. Yes, that was a mistake. Yes, watching him succeed elsewhere stings. But the solution to a past error is not to compound it with a present error. The solution is to learn from it, to apply those lessons to current roster decisions, and to make moves that actually address the team's glaring weaknesses rather than moves that simply make us feel better about past regrets. And speaking of glaring weaknesses, let's talk about what the Toronto Maple Leafs actually need. Not what would be nice to have, not what would generate positive vibes on social media, but what they genuinely, desperately, critically need to become a championship caliber team. They need defensive stability. They need a legitimate top four defenseman who can play heavy minutes against elite competition, who can move the puck efficiently under pressure, who can anchor a penalty kill, who can be trusted in the final 2 minutes of a tied playoff game. That has been a consistent, recurring, undeniable weakness of this franchise for years. Every playoff exit, every devastating loss, every moment of heartbreak can be traced back to defensive breakdowns, to the inability to protect leads, to the lack of a shutdown presence on the blue line. And yet here we are once again having a conversation about acquiring another forward, another middle six winger, who brings grit and physicality, but doesn't address the fundamental structural flaw that has prevented this team from advancing deep into the playoffs. This is where I need to bring up Rasmus Andersson again, because this comparison is absolutely critical to understanding the opportunity cost of a Mason Marchment trade. Andersson is 29 years old, the same age as Marchment. He's a right-shot defenseman, logging over 24 minutes per night in all situations for Calgary Flames. He's produced 22 points through 34 games while playing against top competition every single night. He's a proven top-pairing defenseman who would immediately stabilize Toronto's backend, who would allow Morgan really to play more favorable matchups, who would give the coaching staff the flexibility to manage ice time more effectively. And according to multiple reports, Andersson would be willing to sign a long-term extension with Toronto, which transforms this from a rental situation into a foundational move that impacts the franchise for the next 5 years. Now compare that to Mason Marchment, a forward who plays a style Toronto already has covered, who produces at a rate Toronto already has covered, who would be a marginal upgrade at best, and who addresses none of the team's critical weaknesses. The choice should be obvious. The decision should be easy. But this is where emotion clouds judgment, where nostalgia distorts reality, where the desire to correct a past mistake overrides the need to make the right move for the present and future. Let me address the argument about playoff performance, because this keeps getting repeated as if it's some kind of trump card that justifies the acquisition. Marchman's game is built for playoffs. He thrives in physical, grinding series. He brings an edge that this team needs. And you know what? That's partially true. His style does translate well to playoff hockey. But here's the uncomfortable question. If his playoff performance is so valuable, if his physical presence is so transformative, then why did the Florida Panthers, a team that went to the Stanley Cup Finals, allow him to walk in free agency? Why didn't they prioritize keeping him if he was such a critical piece of their playoff success? The answer is simple. Florida recognized that while Marchment was a useful complementary player, he was not essential to their core identity. They had other players who could fill that role. They had younger, cheaper options who could provide similar production. And they made the strategic decision to allocate their resources elsewhere, to invest in areas of greater need. That's what smart organizations do. They make difficult decisions based on value and necessity, rather than sentiment and comfort. Now let's talk about the cost, because that's where this proposal becomes even more problematic. Seattle is not going to give Mason Marchment away for free. They're going to want assets in return. Draft picks, prospects, young NHL-ready players. And every asset Toronto gives up for Marchment is an asset they can't use to acquire Rasmus Andersson or another legitimate top-four defenseman. Every dollar of cap space allocated to Marchment is a dollar that can't be spent on addressing the blue line. This is what's called opportunity cost, and it's a hidden killer of mediocre organizations. They make moves that feel good in isolation, but prevent them from making the moves that would actually transform their championship probability. They prioritize comfort over courage, familiarity over functionality. And they wonder why they keep getting the same disappointing results year after year. The Toronto Maple Leafs have been stuck in this cycle for decades. They make incremental moves that generate temporary excitement, but don't fundamentally change the trajectory of the franchise. They acquire players who fit a narrative rather than players who fill a need. And they convince themselves that this time, this move, this familiar face will be the one that finally breaks through. But championship teams don't operate that way. Championship teams identify their weaknesses with brutal honesty. They prioritize those weaknesses ruthlessly, and they make bold, sometimes uncomfortable moves to address them. They don't chase nostalgia. They don't make decisions based on correcting past mistakes. They make decisions based on maximizing their probability of winning a championship in the present window. And right now, in this moment, the move that maximizes Toronto's championship probability is not Mason Marchment, it's Rasmus Andersson. Here's a scenario that should terrify every person in Leafs Nation. Toronto trades a second-round pick and a prospect for Mason Marchment. He comes in, plays reasonably well, provides some energy and physicality, generates some positive vibes. The team makes the playoffs, faces a legitimate contender in the first round, and once again gets exposed offensively. They give up 3 goals in the third period of a critical game. They can't protect the lead. They watch their season end in familiar, devastating fashion. And as they're cleaning out their lockers, as they're facing another summer of disappointment and soul-searching, they realize that they had the opportunity to address their fundamental weakness, and they chose comfort instead. That is the nightmare scenario. That is the outcome that keeps me awake at night, because it's not hypothetical. It's the exact pattern this franchise has followed for years. They make moves that feel good emotionally, but don't address their structural flaws. They prioritize short-term gratification over long-term success. And they wonder why the results never change, why the disappointment feels so familiar, why the window keeps closing without a championship to show for it. So here's my challenge to Leafs Nation. Stop thinking with your heart for just a moment. Stop letting nostalgia and emotion drive the conversation. And ask yourself this question with complete honesty. If you could make one move right now, if you could acquire one player to maximize Toronto's championship probability, would it be Mason Marchment or Rasmus Andersson? A middle six winger who provides physicality and grit in a style the team already has covered, or a top 4 defenseman who addresses a team's most glaring weakness and can be signed long-term to become a foundational piece? The answer should be obvious. The decision should be easy. But if we're being honest, truly honest, The conversation keeps circling back to Marchment because it feels good, because it corrects a past mistake, because it's comfortable and familiar, and doesn't require us to think differently about how this team should be constructed, and that, more than any single player or any single move, is what's holding this franchise back. The unwillingness to make the difficult, uncomfortable, bold decisions that championship organizations make without hesitation. If you believe Toronto should prioritize defensive stability over nostalgic reunions, if you believe this franchise needs to finally learn from its mistakes and make strategic moves instead of emotional ones, if you believe that Rasmus Andersson is a far more impactful acquisition than Mason Marchment, then let me know in the comments. And if you want to be here for every moment of this journey, for every decision that shapes the future of this franchise, then join this family right now. Because this isn't just about one trade. This is about whether the Toronto Maple Leafs are finally ready to become the organization they've always had the potential to be.